I moved into the house on Mercer Road in the middle of February. It was one of those months where winter feels like it will never end, and the sky stays the same flat gray from morning until dark. The house was a foreclosure, which meant it was cheap, and cheap was all I could afford after the divorce. The realtor had been honest with me, more or less. She said the previous owners had left in a hurry, some kind of financial trouble. She said the house had been sitting empty for about 8 months and would need work. What she did not tell me was that they had left most of their belongings behind, including furniture, boxes of old clothes, and what seemed like decades' worth of accumulated junk stuffed into every closet and corner. I did not care. I was 34 years old, recently divorced, and starting over with nothing but a used truck and a job at a distribution warehouse 20 minutes away. The house had 3 bedrooms, a basement, and a backyard with a chain-link fence. It was more space than I needed, but the price was right, and I was tired of living in my brother's spare room. The first week was mostly about making the place livable. I threw out garbage bags full of old newspapers and magazines. I hauled broken furniture to the curb. The previous owners had left behind a lot of strange things. Boxes of VHS tapes with no labels, a collection of porcelain figurines, most of them chipped or cracked, stacks of TV dinner trays that had never been washed. The smell was the worst part. The house had a sour, musty odor that I could not seem to get rid of no matter how many windows I opened or how much cleaning spray I used. I figured it was just what happened when a place sat empty for too long. Mold in the walls, maybe. Dead mice somewhere I had not found yet. I bought a few air fresheners and tried not to think about it too much. The basement was the last place I tackled. I had been avoiding it, partly because it was cold and damp down there, and partly because the single bare bulb that hung from the ceiling barely lit half the space. The previous owners had stored most of their junk down there, piled up against the walls in no particular order. There were old bicycles with flat tires, a broken treadmill, stacks of cardboard boxes held together with packing tape that had turned yellow and brittle, a few pieces of furniture covered with sheets that had gone gray with dust and age. I worked my way through it slowly, sorting things into piles. Trash, donate, keep. Most of it was trash. I filled the bed of my truck 3 times with loads for the dump. It took me about a week to clear out most of the basement. I was down to the last corner, the darkest part of the space where the light from the bulb barely reached. There were a few more boxes back there, and what looked like another piece of furniture under a sheet. I grabbed the sheet and pulled. What I saw made me step back so fast that I tripped over a box behind me and went down hard on my back. The wind went out of me, and for a few seconds I just lay there on the cold concrete floor, staring at what I had uncovered. It was a girl, or at least, that was what my brain told me in that first terrible moment. A girl, standing perfectly still in the corner of my basement, staring at me with eyes that did not blink. Then the logical part of my mind caught up, and I realized it was not a real girl. It was a doll, a life-size doll, about 5 feet tall, dressed in a white dress that had gone dingy with age. The dress had lace around the collar and cuffs, the kind of thing you might see on a girl in an old photograph. I got to my feet slowly, my heart still pounding. I had scared myself, that was all. Just a doll. A weird, creepy doll that some previous owner had left behind for whatever reason. But even as I told myself this, I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The doll did not look right. It did not look like any doll I had ever seen. The face was too detailed, too specific. It was not the generic prettiness you see on toy store dolls. This face had actual features: a slightly crooked nose, a small mole near the left ear, eyebrows that were uneven, one slightly higher than the other. The skin was the color of old wax, slightly yellow, with a texture that looked almost like real skin. The hair was dark brown, almost black, and it fell past the shoulders in tangled waves. It did not look like doll hair. It looked like real human hair. And the eyes. God, the eyes. They were large and dark, and they did not blink. They stared straight ahead with a fixed intensity that made me feel like I was being watched. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. The smell in the basement seemed stronger now, and I realized that the sour, rotten odor I had been fighting since I moved in was coming from this corner, from the doll. I should have called someone right then. I should have realized that something was deeply wrong, but I did not. I told myself it was just an old toy, some kind of antique or collector's item that had been stored badly and started to rot. I told myself the smell was just mold or mildew or whatever materials the thing was made from breaking down. I left the doll where it was and went upstairs. I took a shower and made myself dinner and tried to watch TV. But I could not stop thinking about it, about those eyes staring at nothing in my basement. That night I did not sleep well. I kept waking up, sure that I had heard something moving in the house. Footsteps on the stairs, a door creaking open. But whenever I got up to check, everything was quiet and still. The next morning I went back down to the basement. I do not know what I expected to find. I think part of me hoped the doll would be gone, that I had imagined the whole thing. But it was still there, standing in the corner, staring at nothing with those big, unblinking eyes. I made myself walk closer. I wanted to examine it, to figure out what it was made of. Maybe to find a manufacturer's tag or some indication of where it had come from. The smell got worse the closer I got. It was not just musty anymore. There was something else underneath. Something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. I reached out and touched the face. The skin was cold and slightly damp. It did not feel like plastic or rubber or anything artificial. It felt like flesh. Cold, dead flesh. I pulled my hand back like I had been burned. My heart was pounding again, and I could feel the hair standing up on the back of my neck. It is just a doll, I told myself. A very realistic doll, made from some kind of weird material. Maybe silicone or latex or something. But I did not believe it. Not really. I grabbed the sheet from the floor and threw it back over the doll. I could not stand to look at those eyes anymore. I spent the rest of the day upstairs, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. Old houses had old things in them. Some of those things were strange. That did not mean anything was wrong. But I could not stop thinking about the way the skin had felt under my fingers. The way the smell seemed to cling to me, even after I washed my hands 3 times. That night I dreamed about the doll. In the dream I was walking down the basement stairs, and I could see her standing in the corner, still covered by the sheet. But as I watched, the sheet started to move. It slid off her shoulders and fell to the floor, and she turned her head slowly to look at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her lips moved like she was trying to speak, but there was only silence. I woke up in a cold sweat, and I did not go back to sleep. The next few days were bad. I went to work, came home, made myself eat something, and tried to ignore the fact that there was something in my basement that I did not understand. I stopped going down there entirely. I kept the door closed and tried not to think about it. But the smell got worse. It started seeping up through the floor, filling the whole house with that sweet, rotten odor. I bought more air fresheners. I opened all the windows even though it was freezing outside. Nothing helped. By the end of the week, I knew I had to do something. I could not live like this, in a house that smelled like death, afraid to go into my own basement. I decided to get rid of the doll. I would put it in the back of my truck and take it to the dump. Whatever it was made of, I did not want it in my house anymore. I went down to the basement with a pair of work gloves and a garbage bag. My plan was to wrap the doll up and carry it out without having to touch it or look at it any more than necessary. The basement was dark, darker than usual. The single light bulb had burned out, and I had to use the flashlight on my phone to see. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating piles of junk and empty cardboard boxes. I made my way to the back corner, where the sheet-covered form stood motionless. The smell was overwhelming now, so bad that I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. I grabbed the sheet and pulled it off. The doll stared at me with those big, empty eyes. I stood there for a moment, steeling myself. Then I reached out and grabbed it by the shoulders, intending to lift it and carry it to the stairs. It was heavier than I expected, much heavier. I staggered under the weight, lost my balance, and fell backward. The doll came with me. We went down together, me and that thing, and it landed on top of me with a weight that drove the air from my lungs. I could feel it pressing against my chest, could feel the cold dampness of its skin through my shirt. And then the smell hit me full force, and I knew what it was. I knew what it had always been. This was not a doll. This was a body, a human body. A dead girl who had been dressed up and posed and left standing in a corner like some kind of sick display. I screamed. I do not remember what I said or how long I screamed, but I remember the sound of my own voice echoing off the basement walls. I shoved the body off me and scrambled backward on my hands and knees, my phone forgotten on the floor, the flashlight beam pointing at the ceiling. I made it to the stairs and climbed them on all fours, not caring about the splinters in my hands or the bruises on my knees. I burst through the basement door and slammed it behind me, then leaned against it, breathing hard, trying not to throw up. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to dial 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. She asked me what my emergency was, and I told her. I told her there was a body in my basement, a dead body that had been made to look like a doll. I think she asked me some questions after that, but I do not remember what they were or what I said. I just remember sitting on the kitchen floor, my back against the basement door, waiting for the police to arrive. They came quickly. 2 patrol cars, then more. Then an ambulance, even though there was no one to save. Then men in suits who introduced themselves as detectives. Then people in white jumpsuits who went down into my basement with lights and cameras and plastic bags. I sat in the back of a police car for what felt like hours, answering the same questions over and over. How long had I lived here? When had I found the body? Had I touched anything? Had I moved anything? I told them everything. About clearing out the basement. About finding the doll. About how I had tried to convince myself it was just some kind of weird antique. About how I had touched its face and felt cold flesh under my fingers. The detective who interviewed me was a woman named Chen. She was maybe 50, with short gray hair and a face that did not give much away. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes in a small notebook. When I finished, she asked me if I had known the previous owners of the house. I said no. She asked me if I had any connection to the property before I bought it. I said no. She asked me if I had any idea who the victim might be. Victim. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. Until that moment, I had been thinking of the body in abstract terms, as a thing, a problem, an object that needed to be dealt with. But she was not an object. She was a person. She was someone's daughter. I said no, I had no idea who she was. Detective Chen nodded and wrote something in her notebook. Then she told me to wait, and she got out of the car and walked over to where the other detectives were standing. I watched them talk. I could not hear what they were saying, but I could see their faces, and they looked serious, more than serious. They looked disturbed. After a while, Detective Chen came back. She told me I would need to come to the station to give a formal statement. She told me I would not be able to stay in my house tonight, maybe not for several nights, while they processed the scene. I asked her if they knew who the victim was. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Her name was Emily Marsh. She was 12 years old. She had been missing for almost 3 years. The name did not mean anything to me at first. I did not remember hearing about any missing girl named Emily Marsh. But later, after I gave my statement and got a room at a motel and finally had a chance to look at my phone, I found the articles. Emily Marsh had disappeared from a neighborhood about 20 miles from Mercer Road. She had been walking home from school on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and she never arrived. There were no witnesses, no signs of struggle, no evidence of any kind. She had simply vanished. The search had been massive. Hundreds of volunteers, police from 3 different jurisdictions, dogs and helicopters and search teams combing through woods and fields and abandoned buildings. They found nothing. The case stayed in the news for months. Emily's parents gave interviews, pleading for information. The police held press conferences, asking anyone with knowledge to come forward. Tips poured in, but none of them led anywhere. Eventually, the coverage faded. The search was scaled back. The case went cold. And the whole time, Emily had been standing in the basement of a house on Mercer Road, 20 miles away, dressed in a white dress, posed like a doll, waiting to be found. I did not sleep that night. I lay on the motel bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the weight of her body on top of mine, thinking about the cold dampness of her skin, thinking about those big unblinking eyes. The police contacted me again the next morning. Detective Chen wanted to meet with me, to update me on the investigation and ask some follow-up questions. I met her at the station. She led me to a conference room and offered me coffee, which I accepted even though I was too wound up to drink it. She told me what they had found. Emily's body had been preserved using a combination of chemicals and refrigeration. The basement where I found her had a second room behind a false wall, a room that had been converted into a kind of cold storage unit. The previous owners had apparently been running it off a separate electrical system, which is why I had not noticed any unusual power usage. The preservation process had been sophisticated, Detective Chen said. Professional, almost. Whoever had done this had known what they were doing. They had also dressed Emily in the white dress, styled her hair, and applied some kind of sealant to her skin to give it that waxy, doll-like appearance. The eyes were her own eyes, treated with chemicals to prevent decay. I felt sick listening to this. I excused myself and went to the bathroom and threw up the coffee I had not really drunk. When I came back, Detective Chen apologized. She said she knew this was difficult, but she needed me to understand the full picture. The previous owners of the house on Mercer Road were named Carl and Donna Heller. They had owned the property for 15 years before losing it in foreclosure. The bank had taken possession of the house and all its contents, which is how it had ended up on the market, and how I had ended up buying it. The Hellers had fled the state about 8 months before I moved in. Their whereabouts were unknown. There was now a nationwide warrant for their arrest. Detective Chen showed me their pictures. Carl was in his 50s, with a round face and thinning hair. Donna was about the same age, with small eyes and a thin mouth. They looked like anyone. They looked like neighbors. They looked like people you would pass on the street without a second glance. I stared at their faces and tried to understand how two people who looked so ordinary could have done what they did to Emily Marsh. Detective Chen told me more over the next few days as the investigation continued and more information came to light. Emily had been abducted on her way home from school. The police believed she had been taken by someone in a vehicle, someone who had been watching her, learning her routine. There were no witnesses because it had happened quickly, in a place with no houses and no traffic. They did not know exactly how long Emily had been alive after the abduction. The state of her body made it difficult to determine a precise time of death, but the medical examiner believed she had been killed within the first few weeks. The cause of death was asphyxiation. She had been strangled. After she was dead, the Hellers had preserved her body and kept it in their basement. For almost 3 years, they had lived in that house, going about their daily lives, while Emily stood in the dark below them. Detective Chen did not know why they had done this. That question, the question of motive, remained unanswered. The Hellers had no known connection to Emily or her family. There was no evidence that they had known her before the abduction. As far as the police could tell, Emily had been a random victim, chosen for no reason that anyone could understand. The investigation continued for weeks. I was interviewed several more times, though I had nothing useful to add. I was just the unlucky person who had bought a house with a dead girl in the basement. I could not go back to Mercer Road. Not just because the police had it cordoned off, but because I could not bear the thought of setting foot in that place again. I stayed at the motel for 2 weeks, then rented a small apartment on the other side of town. I told my boss I needed time off. He gave me 2 weeks of paid leave without asking questions. During that time, I learned more about Emily Marsh. I read every article I could find. I watched the old news clips. I looked at photographs of her smiling face, her dark hair, her bright eyes. She had been in 6th grade when she disappeared. Her favorite subject was science. She had a dog named Biscuit. brother named Tyler. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She never got the chance. I also learned more about the Hellers. The police had traced their movements after they fled the house on Mercer Road. They had driven south, using cash to pay for gas and motels. The trail went cold somewhere in Tennessee. There were reported sightings after that, but none of them panned out. The Hellers had disappeared as thoroughly as Emily had 3 years before. I thought about them a lot during those weeks. I thought about what it must have been like to live in that house, knowing what was in the basement. Going to work, buying groceries, mowing the lawn, all while a dead child stood in the dark below. Did they visit her? Did they check on her, make sure she was still preserved, still standing, still staring at nothing with those big empty eyes? Did they talk to her, touch her, pretend she was still alive? I did not know. I could not know. The Hellers were the only ones who could answer those questions. And they were gone. The funeral was held about a month after I found Emily. Her parents had finally been able to claim her body, finally been able to give her a proper burial after 3 years of not knowing. I did not go to the funeral. I did not know the family, and I felt like my presence would be intrusive, unwelcome. I was the man who had found their daughter in his basement. I was a reminder of everything that had been done to her. But I watched the news coverage. I saw her parents standing by the grave, holding each other, their faces wet with tears. I saw her little brother, older now, standing off to the side with the stunned look of someone who could not quite believe what was happening. And I saw the crowds. Hundreds of people had come to pay their respects. People who had searched for Emily when she first disappeared. People who had hoped, against all odds, that she might still be alive somewhere. They were wrong, of course. She had been dead almost from the beginning. And she had been so close, the whole time. 20 miles away, standing in a basement, dressed like a doll. I thought a lot about that distance in the weeks after the funeral. 20 miles. I could have driven it in less than half an hour. If someone had known, if someone had looked in the right place, they could have found her. But no one knew. No one looked. And Emily stayed in the dark, year after year, while the world above her moved on. The police caught the Hellers about 2 months after I found Emily. They had made a mistake, used a credit card at a gas station in New Mexico. Someone recognized them from the news and called it in. When the police arrived, Carl tried to run. He made it about 50 feet before they tackled him. Donna did not run. She just stood there, by the car, waiting. One of the officers said she was smiling. They were extradited back for trial. The whole process took almost a year, with delays and motions and legal maneuvering. I followed it in the news, obsessively at first, then less and less as time went on. I was called as a witness. I had to sit in a courtroom and describe finding Emily's body, touching her face, realizing what she was. I had to look at Carl and Donna Heller, sitting at the defense table, and answer questions about what I had seen and done. They did not look at me. They did not look at anyone, really. They just sat there, expressionless, like they were waiting for a bus. The trial revealed more details about what had happened. The prosecution presented evidence that the Hellers had been planning the abduction for months. They had driven past Emily's school multiple times. They had watched her walk home. They had prepared the basement in advance, setting up the cold storage room and acquiring the chemicals they would need. They had been methodical about it, patient. They had thought of everything, except apparently for the fact that they might one day lose their house to foreclosure and have to leave Emily behind. The motive remained unclear, even after the trial. The Hellers did not testify, did not explain themselves. Their lawyer made some half-hearted argument about mental illness, but there was no evidence to support it. The prosecution's theory was that the Hellers had wanted a child. They had never been able to have one of their own, and something in their twisted minds had decided that taking one was the answer. But that did not explain why they killed her. It did not explain why they preserved her body and kept it for years. It did not explain the white dress, the styled hair, the treatment that made her look like a doll. Some things, I realized, do not have explanations. Some things are just broken, in ways that cannot be understood or fixed. The Hellers were convicted. Carl got life without parole. Donna got the same. They were taken away in handcuffs, and that was the last I saw of them. Emily's parents were in the courtroom for the verdict. I watched them as the sentence was read. Emily's mother cried. Her father put his arm around her and stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his eyes dry. After it was over, I went outside and stood on the courthouse steps, breathing the cold air and trying to feel something. Relief, maybe. Closure. Something. But I did not feel anything. Just tired. Tired and empty and ready for all of it to be over. I sold the house on Mercer Road eventually. It took a long time. No one wanted to buy a house where a body had been found. I had to take a loss, a big one, but I did not care. I just wanted to be rid of it. I moved to a different town, a different state. I got a new job, made new friends, tried to build a new life. I told myself that I would put all of it behind me, that I would move on and forget. But I have not forgotten. I do not think I ever will. Sometimes late at night, I still think about Emily. I think about her walking home from school on that Tuesday afternoon, thinking about homework and dinner, and whatever 12-year-old girls think about. I think about the car that pulled up beside her, the hands that grabbed her, the darkness that swallowed her up. I think about her standing in that basement, year after year, alone in the dark. I think about her eyes, her big, unblinking eyes, staring at nothing. And I think about the moment when I pulled off that sheet and saw her for the first time. The way my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. The way I told myself it was just a doll. Just a strange old toy left behind by the previous owners. I wanted it to be a doll. I wanted there to be a simple explanation, a way to make sense of what I had found. But there was no simple explanation. There was only a dead girl in my basement, and the two people who had put her there. The years have passed. 5 years now, since I found Emily. I do not live in fear anymore. I do not wake up in cold sweats, or check the locks 3 times before bed. The nightmares have mostly stopped, but I have never bought another house. I rent now, always. I do not want to own a place, do not want to be responsible for whatever secrets might be hidden in its walls. And I never go into basements anymore. Not ever. If something needs to be stored or retrieved from a basement, I ask someone else to do it. I make up excuses. I say I have a bad knee, a fear of spiders, whatever works. The truth is simpler and uglier. The truth is that every time I see a set of stairs leading down into darkness, I think about Emily Marsh. I think about the weight of her body on top of mine. I think about the cold dampness of her skin. And I think about the Hellers, somewhere in prison, living out their lives in cells while Emily lies in a grave. I wonder if they think about her. I wonder if they remember the white dress, the styled hair, the big unblinking eyes. I wonder if they are sorry. I do not think they are. I do not think people like that feel sorry. They feel nothing, nothing at all. And that is the scariest part. Not the violence, not the death, but the emptiness behind it, the void where a conscience should be. Emily deserved better. She deserved to grow up, to become a veterinarian, to live her life. Instead, she spent 3 years standing in a basement, preserved like some kind of sick trophy, waiting for someone to find her. I found her. I do not know if that means anything. I do not know if it matters. But I found her, and I told the police, and they brought her home. That has to count for something. It has to. I tell myself that anyway. On the bad nights, when the memories come back and I cannot sleep, I tell myself that I did something good, that I helped in some small way to bring Emily home. It does not make me feel better. Nothing makes me feel better. But it is something to hold on to, a small light in all that darkness. Emily Marsh was 12 years old when she died. She liked science and had a dog named Biscuit. She wanted to be a veterinarian. I never knew her. I only knew what was left of her, the shell that the Hellers had kept in their basement. But I remember her. I will always remember her. And maybe that is the best I can do. Maybe that is all any of us can do, in the end. Remember the people who are gone, and try to make sure they are not forgotten. Emily Marsh, 12 years old, taken too soon. I remember you.